All right, folks. So here we go. This is a segment. Once again, I wish I wasn't right about this, but it seems that I am. So, Breakthrough News posts just about 11 days ago here, February 7th, the first flight of undocumented migrants arrives at a U.S. maximum security prison in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The mainstream media has yet to press the Trump administration on the basic questions. Who are these detainees really? Do they have criminal convictions? Will they have access to asylum proceedings? The U.S. has long used the Guantanamo base, itself a stolen zone of Cuban territory, for lawless and indefinite detention, but courts have said those in U.S. jurisdiction there have constitutional protections. So let's take a look at this video here of the migrants arriving at Guantanamo Bay. One guy had a mask. I didn't know the Democratic Socialists of America worked at Guantanamo Bay.
Ah.
All right. Well, hey, good breakthrough news would be pleased to know that at least one established outlet here has bothered commenting on this and now has published a report. U.S. sending nonviolent low-risk migrants, quote-unquote low-risk migrants, to Guantanamo despite vow to detain the worst there. So remember when Donald Trump ordered the construction of a 30,000-bed migrant facility at Guantanamo Bay, which is basically an expansion of an already existing migrant facility at Guantanamo Bay, in addition to the maximum security prison there that is reserved for terror suspects, or so we thought. We're going to get more into that. He said, no, this is only going to be for the worst of the worst. We're only sending the violent criminals to Guantanamo. Well, this reporting seems to contradict that. While the Trump administration has highlighted the transfers of dangerous criminals and suspected gang members to Guantanamo Bay, it is also sending nonviolent, low-risk migrant detainees who lack serious criminal records or any at all, according to two U.S. officials and internal government documents. When he ordered officials to convert facilities inside the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, into a large-scale immigration detention site late last month, President Trump said it would house the worst migrants and provide additional detention space for high-priority criminal aliens. Administration officials have since touted military flights to Guantanamo that they said have transported migrants in the U.S. illegally who have also committed violent crimes like murder and assault, we'll say, for YouTube, as well as alleged members of Tren de Aragua, the infamous gang that originated in Venezuelan prisons. Do I have that name right, Pasta? You would know.
I wouldn't know. I'm the wrong one to ask. Remember, I couldn't even say Saboteur, but I think you did it well.
All right. Well, it's a good answer that you wouldn't know. I mean, that's the thing you wouldn't admit even if you did know. You're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Internal documents and interviews with U.S. officials indicate the administration has sent migrant criminals and alleged gang members to Guantanamo, detaining them in the post-9/11 maximum security prison that also houses in a separate section more than a dozen terrorism suspects. So what this indicates, based on that reporting, is that they are putting some in the maximum security jail, not just this separate migrant facility. But in addition to sending those with criminal records or suspected or known gang ties classified as high-risk detainees, U.S. officials have also transported migrants deemed to be low risk to Guantanamo, according to the government documents obtained by CBS News. More low-risk migrants are expected to be transported on Wednesday alongside high-risk detainees, the documents show. Federal immigration authorities define low-risk detainees as migrants who face deportation because they are in the U.S. illegally, but who have not been arrested or convicted of violent offenses, or other serious crimes government guidelines show. U.S. officials say they could include migrants who lack any criminal record but have been ordered deported because of civil immigration violations, like entering the country without proper documents, i.e., just about everyone and anyone. While the high-risk migrants have been detained in cells at Guantanamo's maximum security prison, the low-risk detainees have been placed in a barrack-like facility known as the Migrant Operations Center that includes rooms with restrooms. Oh, wow. Luxury. According to the documents and one of the U.S. officials who requested anonymity because they were not authorized to speak to the press. The State Department has traditionally used the Migrant Operations Center to house asylum seekers intercepted at sea by the U.S. Coast Guard while they wait to be resettled in third countries. So, yes, we covered this a few weeks ago. They would previously use this migrant facility to house migrants who the Coast Guard intercepted if they were coming over on boats, mostly from Cuba and Haiti, actually. And they would put them in these detention centers at Gitmo until they could either relocate them back to the country they were from, which in many cases is a no-go, especially Cuba. If you leave, you're not really allowed to go back on good terms, or if they could find another country to take you. If either of those two things happen, you can be there as long as we want to keep you there. The whole point of Guantanamo Bay is it's this sort of legal black hole where they don't have to charge you with anything. They can keep you there as long as they want. And now, as we can see, they are putting non-violent offenders here, low-risk immigrants, quote unquote. In a statement Wednesday, a Department of Homeland Security spokesperson confirmed CBS News' reporting, including the separate housing arrangements. Quote, in addition to holding violent gang members and other high-threat illegal aliens, Guantanamo Bay is also holding other illegal aliens with final deportation orders. Every single alien at Guantanamo Bay has a final deportation order, the spokesperson said. Quote, all of these individuals committed a crime by entering the United States illegally. Well, there you go. We always knew they were going to fall back on that. This was never going to be about violent criminals who posed a threat to public safety or drug runners or traffickers. This was always going to broaden out to everybody. The main question here, as it pertains to who they're sending to Guantanamo Bay, is where are they from? Are they from problematic countries that won't accept them back? That's what this exists for. We have more. While we're paused, do you have anything to say so far?
No, I mean, if you have more, keep going. I just, my mind is spinning, right now. Because I just recently I did see a movie about what goes on at Guantanamo Bay and some of the people they took there and the torture tactics they used. And also just thinking about the mindset. Really, I like the way you presented the story, because you did present the story about the quagmire, air quotes, that the United States might have intercepting some of these people at sea. Where do you take them? They can't go back to their country. So let's just put them there. So maybe they had those facilities where they adopted them. Maybe they weren't as treacherous as some of the other people that were taken after 9/11 and that side of the base. And I was also thinking to myself, man, why doesn't Cuba just say enough is enough and close that base? But the United States will open up another base somewhere else.
Right.
It doesn't make a difference.
Well,
this is not about location. It's about culture,
Yeah, so the Supreme Court actually ruled, because I read a report about this. The Supreme Court actually ruled in the 90s that the United States could deny certain asylum-seeking rights to people who are intercepted at sea. Apparently, if you make it to U.S. soil, there's a certain process that the government has to go through to either grant you asylum, put you in a limbo period, or send you back. They intercept you at sea, it's apparently fair game. That's apparently the Wild West. That's why the Coast Guard, when they intercept people at sea, they would put them here. But it's unprecedented. They did not use it for this purpose ever before, where migrants who are living here get sent to Guantanamo. That has not happened before until now.
And Guantanamo was always Keaton, though, but it wasn't about illegal immigrants. It was about enemy combatants, right? Remember that, the whole W situation when they changed it to enemy combatants? When Dick Cheney hit that snag, they were saying all these human rights lawyers are coming out and saying you can't treat these people this way. I'm like, we'll just classify them as enemy combatants, which pretty much left it to up to whatever the State Department and the military apparatus, whatever, how they wanted to treat these people, and yet they're continuing to treat these people the same way. It's just it's
no,
disgusting.
absolutely. Well,
Like
that's the maximum security prison that you're talking about, which apparently is housing some of the violent illegal immigrants. Now, they had this other facility too. It's a lesser known, but they actually did have this too. It was used in very rare cases where the Coast Guard would intercept people at sea. But now they're just taking people out of the country and putting them there. They promised to only do this to violent criminals. And we, of course, I mean, you could pretty easily see that that was bullshit all along. At least I did. In 2 weeks, officials have made some progress in operationalizing Mr. Trump's instructions to establish the facilities needed to detain as many as 30,000 unauthorized migrants at the base in Guantanamo, a 45-square-mile stretch of Cuban land that the U.S. has leased for over a century. Over the past week, U.S. service members at the base have been erecting tents to house migrant detainees beyond the Prison and Migrant Operations Center, both of which have limited capacities. The Migrant Operations Center is hardly ever used. It's horribly run down. That's why they want to build more stuff there to house more people. Officials have also been meeting the administration's goal of transporting groups of detainees to the base daily, sending 8 military flights over the last 9 days. The flights, however, have only carried up to 15 detainees each due to limits on how many can be transported at one time when they reach the base. Well, that seems awful inefficient. Maybe Doge can get on that. 15 at a time seems like a waste of gas to me. So here puts this into a little clearer focus. Here you can get a little clearer idea of what's going on and why. There are now more than 150 migrant detainees held at the U.S. Naval Base at Guantanamo Bay. CBS News' Camillo reports, reports, all of those currently detained at the base are men from Venezuela. There you go. Here we go.
Talk to us about what Guantanamo has become.
Sure.
And what is the difference in the treatment of these undocumented migrants and those who were there longstanding?
Critical questions, Major. President Trump instructed officials to essentially dramatically expand migrant holding capacity at the U.S. naval base in Guantanamo Bay. Historically, under Republican and Democratic presidents alike, the U.S. has detained some migrants there, but these have been asylum seekers intercepted at sea, like Haitian and Cuban refugees who are undergoing screenings by U.S. asylum officers to be resettled in third countries like Australia or Canada, not people arrested in the interior of the country and then sent to Cuba. Now, that is what is happening as we speak. The U.S. has sent about a dozen military flights to Guantanamo Bay with about 150 migrant detainees. And despite what the president has said and what officials like Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary, have said, the people being sent there are not only criminals and alleged gang members, but they also include migrants who are in the country illegally, but who lack any serious criminal record or any at all. And that undermines the administration's messaging that this base will only house the worst of the worst. That's right, Major. And so all these men, we are told, are from Venezuela, and they are going to be detained there until they can be deported to Venezuela. And that is the key question, because, as you know, the government in Venezuela has rejected U.S. deportation flights for years, including under the Biden administration. So these folks could be detained there indefinitely.
And there's the rub. And this is what I told you would happen. They're going to build up these facilities at Guantanamo so they can indefinitely detain migrants from problem nations like Venezuela who won't take them back. That is what this is going to be used for. Not the worst of the worst violent criminals. That was always a load of total bullshit. And now we're seeing that in action, where you have low-risk immigrants who are not a violent threat to anybody, who they said weren't going to be among the first round of deportations, right? First they said we're coming just for the criminals first, right? Now not only are they deporting them, they're sending them to Guantanamo Bay, where they will remain indefinitely until they can find some place that will take them. And if Venezuela refuses to take them and we refuse to take them, well, you do the math. That does not look good. As for the facility itself, this was the report I was referring to: detention of refugees at Guantanamo Bay, offshoring human rights. These are just some brief bullet points from the section on human rights violations at the migrant center. So this is not the maximum facility prison for terror suspects. This is the separate migrant facility with human rights violations of its own. Detention conditions, at the GMOC are inhumane. When the U.S. government engages in incarceration, it must at minimum provide humane conditions of confinement and take reasonable measures to guarantee the safety of the inmates. Conditions at the GMOC are inhumane. Mold, sewage, lack of potable water deprive refugees of their basic rights to sanitation and hygiene. This is a very recent report, by the way, from September of last year. The GMOC facility is too dilapidated to house people, particularly for prolonged periods, and needs to be completely torn down, according to a person who worked there. Well, Trump is building up a beautiful new facility for them, apparently. The GMOC does not meet minimum U.S. safety standards for detention facilities. The U.S. government does not provide adequate medical care to refugees at the GMOC. The U.S. government denies GMOC detainees the right to speak up about inhumane conditions, file grievances, and access courts. Of course, that's why you're at Guantanamo. You don't get to see a judge unless and until we want you to. The U.S. government imprisons children at the GMOC in ways that are contrary to U.S. laws. The U.S. government outsources offshore detention of refugees to IOM and private prison contractors at GMOC who put children and families at risk and repeatedly violate their rights. So that is just a sampling of the list of violations that occur here. But as you can see, this is now underway. And as I said, they're going to use this as a facility to house the immigrants that they can't relocate from problem countries. They can keep them there as long as they want. There's no legal recourse. That's why they're doing it on Guantanamo Bay. The fact that this was not a major red flag to more people as soon as it was announced they were doing this, and by doing this, I mean building the facility, is mind-boggling.
Yeah. It reminds me, man, I mean, my head's just spinning right now because there's so much. Like the first story we talked about in Germany, right? We were talking about how this pro-Palestinian or just anti-ethnic cleansing, I like to call them, rally was taking place with this guest speaker, and the fascist techniques we were talking about, or the authoritarian techniques, if you want to keep it there, the censorship involved, the quelling of speech, and but also the other side of that coin. When I typed in Germany, they were complaining about the fact that these people were marching in the street about open borders, once again demonizing and looking at the immigrant as the problem. I've heard you guys say many times on this show is that a lot of these people on the populist right thinks that if this is the biggest problem, that if we fix this problem, so many things will fall into play. But I think that mentality, and that mentality is out there, Keaton, is why this is justified. These encampments are justified. Shouldn't have broke the law. And remember, it, like you said, it kind of fell back on the fact that their main crime was coming into this country illegally. Therefore, they can do what they want to do to them. And it does remind me, remember the story when they were talking about when they were going to bring some of the prisoners from Guantanamo Bay to the United States prisoners, and people flipped the lid. Oh my God, you can't do that. You can't bring it's this like some level of criminality that these people in Guantanamo Bay. I don't know if people really know what's going on, the type of criminals and some of the people who are in American prisons. I think they would laugh at some of those people coming over at Guantanamo Bay. They wouldn't be a threat, and they're not like MI6 where they're going to escape. But this is some serious human rights that are being broken over there. And I think it's disgusting. But we have to also kind of talk about why there is so much mass migration. I don't think people even understand which Venezuelan criminal they're talking about, air quotes, criminal. And Anya Parampel had talked about this for quite some time.
Sure. When
you look about the situation, I think these situations are caused especially by the United States foreign policy apparatus, where a lot of these Venezuelan criminals, if people don't remember correctly, the first Trump administration, Carlos Vecchia, who was the adversary to the Chavistas in Venezuela, had gone to Donald Trump and say, hey, listen, we want to get some of these people. They're anti-Venezuelan government. Some of them don't even live in Venezuela. They've escaped to other countries because for many years, the CIA would fund a lot of these gangs to go in there and cause problems to try to destabilize these countries and get rid of the Chavistas and the other neighboring countries. It's the same tactics they've been doing for so long. Well, these criminals that were outside the Venezuelan government, and they weren't even living in Venezuela, Donald Trump was presented, hey, can you allow these people and give them work visas to get here? Donald Trump said no, but what at least I'll do is I'll recognize Juan Guaido. And he brought Juan Guaido to Congress, stood him up, everybody applauded. Right? He still wouldn't allow those Venezuelans to come here. Biden gets in. I'll do you one better. Once again, the continuation, the handing of the baton. I'll grant you work visas for these people to come in here to Venezuela. Now, what people do we get were allowed to come in here, right? The Venezuelans who were kind of in gangs, funded to be an oppositional figure against the Maduro, the Chavista government, but yet they come over here, they commit crime, or what happens, these gangs, they have the stigma of these are everyday, average, normal Venezuelans when they're not. You know what I'm saying? They were actually opposition to the government. So to try to send them back, Keaton, what are you going to do? This is an anti-Chavista Venezuela who was funded by the CIA and other NGOs to fight against, try to overthrow our government, and now you want us to take them back? You know what I'm saying? I mean, people have to understand the crux of what's going on and how the United States government exacerbates the migration to the United States in the first place. Because the best way for these multinational corporations that really run our government to get the resources over there in Latin America as cheap as can be is to keep those governments and those countries destabilized as possible, just like they do in the Congo, where all the cobalt is, right? Keep that country destabilized as possible. Now you can extract that cobalt for pennies on the dollar. Keep those people in Haiti living under the threat of gangs and whatnot in a destabilized country, because now we can take that iridium out of that country for pennies on the dollar. So when we look at this situation, and we're kind of talking about it on surface level, we must never forget our role that our government plays in exacerbating the whole migrant situation as is. And then, you know, the beautiful show you guys did with the HB visas. I think that was one of my favorite dissident shows when you were doing your Donald Trump. I love the visas. The visas are great. They're taking advantage of the cheap labor when they get here because they want them here in the first place, yet they're lying through their teeth and telling you that they're the problem. We have to shut it down. It is a quagmire of a problem, but we have to look at the roots if we're going to really solve this. But at the end of the day, Guantanamo Bay, yeah, that's as inhumane as shit. It's awful what they do over there.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's funny you mentioned, if a Venezuelan dissident leaves and then there's a problem of locating them back. This migrant facility in the report that we just referenced there, one of the examples they gave was of this Cuban family. They were Cuban journalists who were dissenting against the Castro government, and they were actually working with the United States, going back and forth from Cuba to Florida. I guess they'd sneak back into Cuba. And then when Cuba passed a law that would have landed them in a lot of legal hot water, they packed up their family and they left for the U.S., thinking they'd be let in because they were already kind of collaborating with the government. No, they intercepted them at sea, the Coast Guard. They took them to Guantanamo Bay, and they had to stay there for a few months before I guess they were finally able to negotiate entry into the United States. But they still had to stay there for quite some time. And now you have such festering of ill will against immigrants, just everyday people, that you could just do anything to them. And it seems like right now the public just finds it to be open season on these people. And it's going to remain that way until more stories like this come out. And we have a story coming up next that kind of is a microcosm of that.
You'll hear a lot of truthers talk about Operation Phoenix, right? That's when I think the social engineers coming out of this one company called Tavistock that work for a lot of the oligarchs on, social engineering, when they had to change it from, okay, we've learned how to control the individual, right? MK Ultra, all these things. Well, how do we control societies? How do we inflame societies? And taking a lot of people from northern Vietnam, placing them in southern Vietnam, you'll always see those conversations come into play, right? Diane Sayre, who's done some great work with Jose Vega in New York, talking to some of these migrants. Well, first of all, these migrants, when they're let in, they sign what do you call them? NDAs, right? That you can't talk about. They can't talk about what's going on when they are let in. But they're jamming like 8, 9, 10 of these people in one hotel room. And when they were talked to about, well, why'd you come? Well, we were told to come. We were provided means to come. They're kind of focusing on that. Operation Phoenix, the UN making a lot of money, sending these people around, exacerbating the situation, because those hotel rooms in New York, they're charging top dollar for each night for those people to stay there, taxing the state or taxing the government and getting their money back. But at the end of the day, I always say, well, wait a second, what was in northern Vietnam that we needed more than anything? It always kind of digresses back to resource extraction. And this is something we have to look at when it comes to Latin America. There's a lot of things. Remember, we'll coup who we want.
Right. Well, of course,
he was saying that about Bolivia, because Bolivia also sits on the lithium triangle, and all these minerals, there's so many of them in Latin America that we're going to constantly see this over and over and over again. And then the mainstream media and the government will only talk about the surface level problems like we have right here. Where do we put them now that we have this problem in hand? Well, the way you stop the problem is you stop causing the problem, right? Get out of these countries right now. Give them their national sovereignty. Let them keep their resources, and we won't have so much migration to the United States in the first place. And I don't know why people just can't figure that out, because every single time I talk to somebody on the populist right, Keaton, yeah, that's a problem, but we should close the border first because that's how you solve the problem. No, how about you stop exacerbating the problem of being in these people's countries, stealing their resources, and then getting mad when they're coming here looking for some trickle down? We need to solve the problem from where it exists. Our foreign policy.
Sure. And that's why it is ultimately like to take that hard a line on immigration while having no critique of the foreign policy just makes you an imperialist at the end of the day, because that's what you want to do. You want to plunder these countries and destabilize these countries, and you want to basically make these countries plantations for American corporations, which is what Cuba was pre-Castro.
Yep.
And then close the door on people when they try to leave, because the quality of life degrades because we just exploit the resources and we exploit the labor. So at that point, you're just an imperialist who wants the American boot on the neck of all of these people south of the border from Mexico all the way on down. Yeah. You should expect some resistance to that from the people who are victimized by that. And it's now a well-established fact. Now, at this point, really, the West has no excuse, whether it's here in our hemisphere where the migration flow is south to north, or in Europe where the migration flow is east to west. When we bomb these Middle Eastern countries, then they get Arab migrants, and then they complain about that. So, yeah, obviously, the solution is all in the foreign policy. And if you have no critique of that, as so many of these people don't, then really you're just advocating for the domination of, the global South and the Middle East and really most of the world. It is just a Western chauvinist imperialist point of view.
Well, the East to West too, and you're right, and that's what they're experiencing right now. But even Gaddafi said this. He said, listen, you get rid of me, man, forget about it. There's going to be a migration going across the water north to Europe like you've never seen before. You know what I'm saying? People have told us about this, and no matter what, and it is interesting because I don't know if I can approach the conversation. Well, you're just an imperialist, right? Like, I'm trying to figure out, how do I talk to my friends out here that, think that migration is one of the biggest problems in the world? I constantly talk about it. We also didn't mention the fact that, and I've been to 7 Latin American countries over the last 3 years, right? So I've spent some time down there. Our dollar in every single country I went to can be used, right? So we also talking about conquering these countries, throwing these crazy IMF loans, which pretty much essentially make all the citizens thrusted into an austerity measures, right? Where they're going to have to pay back these ridiculous loans. And if they don't pay them back, we seize their resources even more. You know what I'm saying? So that is also relevant to what's going on. So no matter what people are talking about, Operation Phoenix, the migration, the fires thrown on, it's always about still resource extraction and throwing our monetary system, keeping our monetary system relevant by forcing on these other countries and crazy IMF austerity loans. I mean, what's that song by Led Zeppelin? The song remains the same, baby. It's still playing.
Please clap.